All right, so this is our last section in Chapter 4, Section 4.7. We're going to talk about overlapping triangles. So sometimes when we have problems where we're trying to show that triangles are congruent, we're trying to find parts of missing triangles, that kind of thing, we end up with triangles that overlap. The key to working with overlapping triangles is we need to find the common parts, find the parts that they share. That's going to be our kind of our big picture thing here, is finding the parts that they share. And it can be helpful to, when we have pictures of overlapping triangles, to redraw the picture and separate the triangles. And for today, we're just going to be working with triangles. So let's look at an example. The big picture is we're looking at overlapping triangles. We want to find the parts they share. We want to find the common parts. And it can be helpful when we're trying to solve the problem to redraw the picture. So let's start with a pretty easy one. So here's my picture. And we'll call this X, Y, W, and Z. And we want, so the question is asking us, what parts do these triangles share? So I'm going to say, what do triangle XWZ and triangle WXY, what do they share? So if you have them, if you have highlighters, it can be helpful to highlight. So XWZ is this triangle, and we're looking at what it shares with triangle WXY. So what part do they share? Segment XW. And the other thing that we could do, if we wanted to, is draw them as separate triangles. So let me draw this. So here is, that's not the kind of triangle I want. I want this kind. So there's triangle XWZ. And if I then draw, go back here. I have a hard time drawing the triangle that I want here. There we go. And there's our other triangle, our triangle WXY. And if we take these and put them right on top of each other, if I grab this one and put it right over here, if I drew them perfectly, they would match up and look exactly like this. So we can redraw, and we see that both of these triangles have the segment XW. So that's what we're trying to do here. So sometimes it can be helpful to draw the two triangles separately to see that they share segment XW. So that's really the big picture in overlapping triangles. Is find the parts that they have in common. It can be helpful to draw two separate triangles to help you visualize what's going on here. So questions on that example? Okay, so let's do an easy proof with similar kind of figure, but we're going to do a proof that has to do with overlapping triangles. So here's our picture for this one. Kind of the same looking, same kind of shape. Just kind of pointed in a different direction. And we're going to call this our STU. And we're given that RT is congruent to US. Segment RT is congruent to segment US. And that angle URS is congruent, or are right angles. Angle URS and angle TSR are right angles. And we want to prove that angle T is congruent to angle U. So we want to prove that these two angles down here in the bottom are congruent. And what we know is that RT and US are congruent, and these angles are right angles. So let's draw two separate triangles. Let's separate these two out. So I'm going to draw two triangles. I'm going to separate those triangles. I'm going to draw them like so. And then I'm going to draw the other one like so. So I just split those two up. And this is going to be angle RUS, triangle RUS, and this is going to be triangle RST. Well, now it's easier to mark the parts that they say are congruent. So it says RT is congruent to US. So these two sides are congruent. So I'll mark those. Angle URS, and angle TSR are right angles. So there's my two right angles. So this is a little easier to work with than this. So our plan here, is to show that the triangles are congruent, and then use CP/CTC, use the corresponding parts of congruent triangles. So what other piece here do we know is congruent on the triangles, Evan? RS is congruent to itself. So I'm going to mark that this is congruent to that. And what would be our property when we write our proof? What would be the property that tells us that that's the case? RS is congruent to RS. Reflexive property. And then just looking at our picture now, where we've almost got our proof we've got it all sketched out. Looking at our picture, how are these two triangles congruent? Does angle side work? No, unless a right angle. Do we have a right angle? Yes, we have a right angle. So what do we call it instead of angle side? What do we call it? HL. So we would say these two triangles are congruent by HL. And since the triangles are congruent, then the angles are congruent. So now we have our proof. We know what we're going to do for our proof. So I'm going to write my statement and my reason. So we'll write our givens that RT, segment RT, is congruent to segment US, and angle URS, angle TSR are right angles, and this is given. We said that RS is congruent to RS, segment RS is congruent to segment RS, and that's going to be reflexive property. And that lets us say the triangles are congruent. We already decided that. So I'm going to say that triangle RUS is congruent to, if I write RUS, how am I going to write my other triangle? So here I have RUS. So what angle on the other triangle is going to match up with angle R? Angle S. I have to match angle R with angle S. So that's the other thing that we get from separating these triangles. Angle R matches with angle S. Angle U matches with angle T. And then angle S matches with angle R. Triangle RUS is congruent to triangle STR. We have to make sure our parts match up in the right order. And we said that was hypotenuse leg. And now I can say angle T is congruent to angle U by CPCTC. And on the quiz, a few of us wrote, when we, instead of CPCTC, we wrote the reason was the triangles are congruent. That's fine. If you don't remember CPCTC, you can say the angles are congruent because the triangles are congruent. That's fine. I'm perfectly fine with that. So, not too bad. We redrew our triangles, and this was not a bad proof. All right, questions there? All right, let's look at another one. So here's our picture for this one. I'm going to call this A, B, this point in the middle, E, D, and C. For this one, we're given that segment AE is congruent to segment BE, and angle C is congruent to angle D. And we want to prove that segment BD is congruent to segment AC. So we're proving that this segment here, BD, is congruent to this segment, AC. Well, it looks like there's a lot of stuff going on here. I have AE, I have segment BE. So I have these bigger triangles and I have these smaller triangles. So let's look at the parts that we have. We're interested in showing that, I'm going to highlight them, that segment BD is congruent to segment AC. We want to show that those two are congruent. Well, we have segment, just going to highlight these. I have segment AE is one thing that they talk about. And I have segment BE. And I have angle C and angle D. So when I look at this problem and I see the parts that they're asking us about and the parts that we have, what I say is let's just look at these little triangles. So I'm going to redraw this problem without all this other stuff in here. So I just want to draw this, this, let's see, and this needs to go there we go. So I'm just going to draw that piece. And this is B, D, A, C, and E. So I redrew this and I got rid of all this other stuff that we don't really need. And we know that AE is congruent to BE. So those are congruent. Angle C and angle D are congruent. So what else do we know on these two triangles what else can we figure out is or are congruent? What do we have? Anybody see anything? We have some vertical angles, don't we? These two angles are across this X from each other. So we can figure out that that angle is congruent to that angle because they're vertical angles. Well, now what parts do we have congruent on these two triangles? Angle, angle, side. And I have an angle, angle, side. So we can say the triangles are congruent by angle, angle, side, and that would let us decide that those segments are congruent. So that's our proof. So let's write it out.
How did you know to separate those like little triangles? How'd you break it up like that?
Well, when I looked, so what I did was I looked at what they gave us. They gave us AE and BE. They gave us that those two were congruent. And we were looking for BD and AC. And they also gave us angle C and angle D. So I said we have these parts and we have these parts of these smaller triangles. So the bigger triangle didn't even really matter. We were just looking at these parts of these smaller triangles. So that's the way I looked at this one. Is that we have the parts of the smaller ones. So let's just look at the smaller ones. And I also knew just from looking at the picture that we could figure out that those two angles were congruent because they were vertical. That was, to me, gives me more parts of these smaller triangles. All right, so let's write our givens. AE is congruent to BE. Angle C congruent to angle D. And that is given. And I redrew my picture here so we could see what was going on more easily. We said that, let's name these angles. So we said angle BED is congruent to angle CEA. I'll call it AEC. And the reason we know that is true is because they are vertical angles. So now I can say triangle B, I'm going to call it triangle BED. Is congruent to triangle. Let's match them up the right way. Which angle is going to match up with angle B? A. Which angle matches up with angle E here? E. We already drew that out. And it's just like we wrote it here. Angle C and angle D have to match up. It says that they're congruent. And what was our reason? What did we say they're congruent? Why are they congruent? Angle, angle, side. So now we can say that the parts of the triangles are congruent. BD, segment BD is congruent to segment AC by CP, CTC. Or you could say those segments are congruent because the triangles are congruent. All right, questions on that one? So when our triangles are overlapping, we need to identify the parts that they share. So these, even though we had triangles that were overlapping, we didn't even need to figure out parts that they shared. I just needed to separate out the triangles that we were interested in from the rest of the the rest of the stuff that they gave us. We didn't even need these other triangles. And then the other thing that can help us out is separating out, redrawing the triangles that we're interested in. So that's really the two things that we wanted to look at today, is finding parts of overlapping triangles that are in common, and two, redrawing the triangles so we're just looking at the pieces that we're interested in. All right, questions? Okay.